You buy a pair of socks, that's 2 socks. You buy a pair of Bombas socks, that's 4 socks. Because one purchased is one donated. Socks are the #1 most requested clothing item in homeless shelters. So when you buy a pair of super comfortable Bombas socks, you're also donating a pair. Bombas customers have powered over 150 million donations. So Bombas would like to thank you 150 million times. But we only have like 30 seconds. Go to bombas.com and use code AUDIO for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com and use code AUDIO at checkout.
Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Today's guest is Caroline Fitzgerald, the CEO and founder of Goals Sports, a women's sports sponsorship consultancy she started in August of 2021. Caroline has more than 10 years of experience in marketing and sales across a variety of industries. Most recently, Caroline was the Senior Vice President of Partnerships at P3R and the Dick's Sporting Goods Pittsburgh Marathon. Caroline holds dual degrees in Marketing and Women Gender Studies and is currently working on an MS in Global Sport at NYU. The topic of this episode of Sports Management Podcast will be women's sports and why more people should watch it and invest in it. Get ready to learn why women who play sports become women who lead, why women's sport only gets 1% of all sponsorship money in sports, and much more. Caroline Fitzgerald, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here today.
I'm very happy to talk to you, and you are the founder and CEO of Goals Sports, a women's sports sponsorship consultancy. So that's very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to. So Goals, just like you said, we're a sports sponsorship consultancy, but we are solely focused on bringing more sponsorship and investment into women's sports. And we do this by working with women's sports organizations, from nonprofits to professional sports teams, to go out there and connect these entities with values-aligned brand partners that it's good for the brand and it's good for the team to connect the two and really bring those sponsorships to life. And, women's sports currently receive less than 1% of global sponsorship dollars. So there's a lot of sponsorship dollars out there. The vast majority of it is currently going to men's sports organizations, athletes, and teams. So I just think it's really, really important to start having those conversations with brands and educating them about not only that women's sports is a good thing to invest in from a gender equality and equity perspective, but women's sports is a good business decision. It's a good investment to invest in women's sports. It's a growing section of the sports industry. So at Goals, we're trying to not only bring more dollars in, but really change the thought process, be a thought leader in reframing women's sports. It's not like something to invest in as like a charity or something to do just like to help women. Yes, of course it is, but also it's a savvy business decision. So we're working to change that way of thinking as well.
Yeah, because some arguments, why do women's sport receive less funds than the men's? Less people are watching it and they generate not as much money, and that's why. So how do you respond to this type of criticism?
Yeah, you really hear all of it. So there's some people that talk about it and that it's not as exciting. So talk about the WNBA and the NBA, that women can't dunk. So why would you watch women's basketball when you get a more exciting game when you watch men's basketball? And first of all, you can dispute that in a couple ways. One, a lot of the players in the WNBA can't dunk. Two, why is dunking? Who decided that dunking is the thing that makes sports or basketball more exciting to watch? And three, it's just as exciting type of play. Some people argue more exciting because it's more technically proficient. But I just think in general, the biggest thing that we hear is that no one watches women's sports. So why would brands invest when the numbers are so much lower than men's sports? And to that, I would answer, how are people expected to become fans of women's sports if women's sports are not on TV or accessible for sports fans to find them and consume them? So women's sports currently receive less than 4% of media coverage. So again, how can somebody become a fan of something that they're not exposed to? So, I think when you look at the growth of women's sports with the amount of distribution that women's sports have, it's actually quite phenomenal, the kind of record-breaking numbers that women's sports continue to put up time and time again. And every single time that women's sports receive adequate coverage or an exposure opportunity, they deliver and people show up, fans show up to watch. One of my favorite examples is from this past summer, the NCAA US Women's College Softball World Series and the Men's College Baseball World Series both had the same broadcast deal, both on, I forget what network they were on, but when all things were equal, the women's softball had higher viewership. Same with the Tennis US Open this past summer. Men's and women's, same broadcast exposure, women's had more. So we not only see these examples of when women's sports are broadcast, fans show up and watch in record-breaking numbers, but in certain cases, when things are equal, we see women's sports performing better than men's sports. So I think that that's a really key thing is we need to educate people that are naysayers that are saying nobody watches women's sports. Like, yes, because they're not on TV as much or as available as much, but when they are, here is how they perform. And quite frankly, it's just a great product. It's great entertainment. It's exciting to watch. So that's some of the arguments I would give to help make the business case for women's sports.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it's the broadcasting companies actually that we need to convince. Since, as you said, women's sport is interesting and exciting. And if it's accessible, then people will watch it. So maybe we need to go back to the broadcasting companies and start there.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think in that case, we're fighting against years and years of contracts that are, quite frankly, with professional sports league, men's professional sports leagues that have these air times in place. But the really interesting thing about women's sports fans, and there was this really great report that was done by Sports Innovation Lab via the Fan Project is the name of the report this past year, where they studied behavior of women's sports fans to see how they were consuming women's sports and what do they do like when they have a team that they love or a game that they want to watch. And what they found was that women's sports fans, because we haven't historically been able to watch our favorite teams, players, games on TV, we've often had to dig on the internet to find streams of it or piece together all these different subscriptions so we could watch it. So we are an incredibly digitally savvy group. So we love to stream women's sports. And then at the same time, we also love to have our stream up on one screen, but then on the other screen be on social media talking to our fellow women's sports fans. So the power for brands related to women's sports fans is not necessarily we need more viewership, we need broadcasts, we shouldn't sponsor women's sports because they don't have broadcasts or TV. They should be looking at the power of women's sports fans where they are, which is watching streams on social media. And one of the big thing that the Fan Project found is that when a brand sponsors women's sports, a women's sports fan is so much more loyal to those brands, and that their buying behavior and their social behavior actually changes to support and to shop and purchase and chat about how they love these brands. So there's a lot of power there. And I think if we think about women's sports and men's sports in an apples to apples kind of way, where it's we need to get women's sports on broadcast and then we can get there, I think we're going to continue to fail. It's a different kind of consumer with different behavior. And I think in order to optimize the power of women's sports and fans, we need to give the people what they want.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned social media and you are very active there. And you wrote something a while back and you said, if you say sports when you're really talking about men's sports, then you are part of the problem, end quote. And then I thought, damn, I've definitely done that at some point. But what do you mean with that? That you prefer to call it men's sports and women's sports, or just and sports when you refer in general? That's what you say, right?
I actually think it kind of goes both ways. I think the problem is when we use vocabulary that is overarching, but we're only really talking about men's sports. So let's give the example of professional sports teams. So most professional women's sports teams have a W or like a women's attached to it. So the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association. On the other side of that, we have the NBA, the Men's National Basketball Association, but we do not designate that with an M. It's not called the MNBA, but it is called the WNBA. So when you look at that, and we always have to put that asterisk there or denote that like we are the women. So it's like the main one is the NBA and then the other one is the WNBA. I think that's problematic because we're othering women. Sport, I think when we think of sport in general, ideally we would think of sport as an inclusive term for all. Like, why is the word sport need to be gendered anyway? Sport is something that all can enjoy, all can consume and love. So, I do think it goes both ways. I think for a long time, because like men's sports they are the big leagues, they came up first in a lot of instances, they've been around the longest. When we talk about it, when society talks about it, we think like, yes, basketball is like the men's basketball, and then also women's basketball is coming up. I mean, March Madness is a great example. We had for a long time March Madness tournament in the United States, and we had the NCAA women's basketball tournament. So I just think that language is really important, and sport is a place that should be for all and a really truly inclusive place. And I think it gets really tricky when we have like sport and what people are referring to are men's sports, but they don't say that. And then we always have to designate women's sports.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. With the NBA and WNBA names, though, I guess that because NBA, when that started, it was only men's professional sport.
Yeah, I would ask the NBA to put an M on it, call it the Men's National Basketball Association. Or, one really interesting example in the hockey space. So this past year, the National Women's Hockey League did a complete rebrand to now be called the Premier Hockey Federation. So they just said, you know what, we're going to drop that W. We have athletes in our league. We are just going to be the Premier Hockey Federation. So I think that's a trend that we're going to start to see probably more and more of, and just removing that W or that gender altogether.
Yeah, I think so too. And most people who listen to this know I am working in the hockey space, and Bauer has Women's Movement Never Stops. They are really trying hard for women's hockey. And just trailblazers like Hillary Knight, for example, that we talked about before. Women's sport is not as exciting. They are not as good. But she speed skated faster than like most of the men. Yeah, it's great to see.
I have a feeling that people who say that women's sports are not as exciting as men's sports have never actually watched women's sports. Because if you've watched it, any of them, they are absolutely tremendous. Oh my gosh, women's hockey is a great example. You know what? When you have your helmets on, you can't tell who people, like everybody's just in a helmet. You don't see hair. You don't see any kind of markers. You just see athletes out there being tough, playing their sport, getting after it. If people think that women's sports aren't exciting, I would just challenge them to watch women's sports, because I can assure you they absolutely are.
Definitely. I agree with you there. I think that's the case as well. With regards to the sponsorship money that the women's team usually receives so much less, that often leads to obviously the team receiving less funds, which means that many professional women athletes are working part-time or sometimes even full-time jobs together with their professional sporting career. Their sponsorship money obviously could help that. But do you see another way to get female professional athletes to be full-time professional athletes?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think sponsorship, to your point, is just kind of one piece of this puzzle. Those dollars, I mean, it comes from a bunch of different ways. So broadcast deals is a huge way that sports organizations, teams, leagues make dollars. Sponsorship's another one. Ticket sales, merchandise sales. Like there's a bunch of different revenue streams. Why I have really honed in and why I truly believe in sponsorship and brand leadership as a key piece of this is because of that brand leadership piece. Brands hold a lot of power. When a big brand that has many consumers, many raving fans, puts their flag in the ground and says, we are going to sponsor this organization, team, league. That's a leadership moment that not only makes all of their existing consumers look, it makes other brands look, it makes other leaders look, investors. Like anytime you see dollars being invested into something, it's just like kind of sales 101. Like the first sale is always the hardest. But when another brand sees that another brand has already vetted this organization and they've invested, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should be looking at this. So I just think because of the power that brands have, it's really a leadership moment. I'll say it again, a leadership moment. It's just really, really important. And I think that that's really a key piece to unlocking all of those other revenue streams that could help move the needle for women athletes.
Do you think that men's sport has a responsibility towards lifting up women's sport?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think solving the problem of inequality and creating more opportunities for women athletes, I think that's only going to be solved if we're all working together towards those solutions. So yeah, and absolutely, I would look to leaders in men's sports teams to come together because we're not going to be able to accomplish anything alone. I mean, I honestly don't love to use the word sponsorship. I like to use the word partnership because anytime you form a relationship between an organization and a brand, like I really see that not as a transaction of a sponsor giving dollars and then you execute that contract. Those two organizations are coming together for a partnership. And so I'm really big on the word partnership. So back to men's teams and women's teams working together, I really believe that strong partnerships are the key to great solutions. So yeah, absolutely. I would challenge all men's sports leaders, players, athletes to come. And there's so many wonderful athletes that are doing that. But in mass, I'd love to see more of a movement to support women's sports across the board.
Me too. I think the first one that comes to mind for me is Andy Murray from tennis. He very often speaks up loudly in press conferences when the media are being sexist, for example. Yeah,
great example. There are so many great examples. Steph Curry's one that comes to mind. Kobe Bryant wore the WNBA orange hoodie and really brought a ton of awareness to the league. There's just the list goes on and on and on. So yeah, I think that's really a key piece here.
Yeah. Challenging the listeners here now that if they haven't watched women's sport, they should. So in the upcoming weeks and months here, what can we look forward to in regards to women's sport?
A couple things. So it's a really exciting time coming up here. So the Olympics, got to talk about that first. So excited for the Winter Olympics. That's going to be great. And I mean, I love the Olympics for a lot of reasons, but a big reason why I love the Olympics is I feel like it's one of the few times that women's sports and men's sports are really on a more level playing field. So the broadcast opportunities are greater for women's sports, the sponsorship, the prize purses with medal winnings, everything feels a bit more equal. So I love the Olympics in that regard. So coming up so soon here. One thing that's coming up that's new that I'm really excited for is Athletes Unlimited, which is a new model of sports leagues in the United States, is launching their basketball season, their inaugural basketball season. So the WNBA in the US has been around for 25 years. I believe the average salary in the WNBA is about $125,000 per year. So the majority of WNBA athletes, in order to make a living, go and play basketball overseas in the off season in order to make more money and keep playing. So I'm really excited about this Athletes Unlimited season because it's happening here in the US and it's providing opportunities for WNBA athletes to stay closer to home and still play professional basketball. So that's starting soon. Really excited for that. What else? We're gearing up for another NWSL, National Women's Soccer League season. There's a lot. The list goes on and on and on. My gosh, March Madness basketball. And I say March Madness talking about women's basketball this year because it officially includes the women's tournament. So that's coming up. There's just a lot. And to give everybody a nice tip, my very favorite online calendar for finding all the women's sports offerings, streams, what's on TV, what's coming up is Just Women's Sports, which is a media platform that's dedicated to just covering women's sports. What it does is in the name. They have a really great schedule tool on their website where you can go on and look at every single sport and what games and what tournaments are coming up. So definitely check that out.
That's great advice. And what's going on in US with soccer? Like that's been European football and that has been something that they do in Europe. And now I feel both for women's and for men's soccer, both for men and for women in the US has really grown lately.
It absolutely has. I think a lot of that credit, it goes back to the 99ers, the United States women's national team in 1999. I think that kind of started it. And then since then, with the establishment of the National Women's Soccer League, I think that was about 12 years ago. And the continued success of the U.S. National Women's Soccer Team with Megan Rapinoe and Crystal Dunn and Alex Morgan and all these international superstars, I think that has brought a lot of popularity to the United States. Finally, we're catching up to the rest of the world with our soccer fandom, or should I say football, football fandom. And, I just think it's a really, really exciting time, especially for women's soccer football in the United States. We're seeing tremendous growth in fandom, sponsorship dollars, broadcast opportunities. And I think it's just going to continue to grow. If global trends tell us anything, it's going to be pretty big.
This episode is sponsored by InSport Education, the online business school for sport. They offer a range of different courses, for example, Foundations of Sport Business, Private Equity in Sport, and much, much more. As a listener to this podcast, you get 10% off all of their courses using the code SportsManagementPodcast10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today. If we talk a little bit about you and your career in sports, we mentioned, of course, that you are the CEO and founder of Goals to Sport, but you also have some previous experience from corporate partnerships and marketing. So can you tell us a little bit about your career journey in sports?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I honestly never really expected I'd be sitting in this seat today talking to you as the CEO and founder of Goals. It's been quite a windy journey, I think, like a lot of people's career paths to get to this place. So, I started, I guess, to take it really far back, like let's take it all the way back to about 7 or 8 year old Caroline. My first kind of feminist moment in sports, if you will, was when my brother and I were playing baseball. We were playing baseball in the yard and it was time for our parents to sign us up for Little League, or it was like a step above T-ball, I should say. It was parent pitch. And there wasn't a girls baseball team. There was only a boys baseball team. So my dad signed my brother and I both up for the team. He said, well, you're just going to play on your brother's team, or my brother's going to play on my team, if you will. So we're both going to be on the same team. So we showed up to our first game and I remember being there and the other team was mocking us and making fun of us, assuming that they were going to win that game because I was a girl and I was on that team. They were saying things like, oh, they have a girl, we're going to beat them. And we're so little. So it's just like light taunting. But I remember thinking that and being so angry. And so we took the field for the first inning and I was playing pitcher's helper. Again, parents are pitching. So I'm like standing next to the pitcher's mound to field any balls that come my way. And the first 3 boys on that team hit ground balls to me and I threw all of them out. 1, 2, 3. got them all out. And then I walked off the field with like confidence, swagger, like a little chip on my shoulder, and was like, how dare you say that we were going to be a worse team than you? I just threw all of you out because I'm a girl and I'm on this team. And, that was a really, really big moment for me that kind of put me on a path towards being in sports and like really showing up and being a proud woman in sports and a proud female athlete. So I continued to play baseball, softball, but my main sport was basketball. Played basketball through high school. Through college, I played club basketball. I went to Penn State. I went to the Honors College at Penn State and studied marketing and women and gender studies. Again, always kind of was really interested in feminism and like female empowerment, and really wanted to study the intersection of marketing and female consumer behavior specifically. So studied that, and then graduated and got a job with Kohl's department stores, first working in retail and store management, but then ultimately knew I wanted to work in marketing. So I moved to Wisconsin and Milwaukee, which is where the corporate headquarters was, and worked on the team that built marketing plans across the entire company. So anytime there was a big promotion happening for the store, my team was putting that promotion plan together. So Black Friday sales, back to school sales, tax-free sales, whatever that big thing was, we were doing the cross-company campaign. So loved that. That's really where I got that practical experience as a marketer. But I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I don't know if I mentioned that, but Pittsburgh is such a sports town. It's such a town with hometown pride. I'm also one of 8 kids, and the majority of my family lives in Pittsburgh. Big family, big sporting family. And I just wanted to be back in Pittsburgh. I liked Milwaukee, but I wanted to move home. So I moved home to work at the Smithsonian Museum in Pittsburgh, the Heinz History Center, in a marketing and events role. I was the director of public programs there. That was a great job. I loved it, but I love sports. I wanted to get back into sports in some capacity, and eventually found an opportunity to work for the Dick's Sporting Goods Pittsburgh Marathon, the nonprofit that puts on all of the running events that happen in the city. And the job that was offered to me that I ultimately accepted was a sales and sponsorship role. And I had never done that before. Again, all marketing, events, like retail. That I had never done sales, but I was very lucky to have a great mentor and boss there that educated me and told me, he's like, sponsorship sales are just building good marketing plans for brands that want to market their brand through your sponsorship or organization. So I was like, oh, I can do a marketing plan. I've done that. So I accepted the role and jumped in and really loved it and found a knack for it, and was there about 5 years. Worked with brands like Dick's Sporting Goods, FedEx, Bank of America, PNC Bank, Brooks Running, just a ton of wonderful, wonderful brand partners, and loved that job as well. I've been fortunate to have a lot of jobs that I really, really love, but the pandemic hit and all of our running events went to virtual because we weren't able to gather, and I was able to work the whole time through the pandemic, but like you, I found myself at home more with some more time on my hands, and got to pick up some hobbies. And one of those hobbies was watching women's sports and taking the time to find those streams of the women's sports I wanted to watch. And I really became a huge fan of the 2020 WNBA season. And that was for a couple of reasons. One, because of the wonderful basketball, of course, that was being played, but also because the women of the WNBA, the players of the WNBA, dedicated their 2020 season to the Black Lives Matter movement and creating social and racial justice. And what they did that season was just so powerful. I was so moved by it. And I became really, really interested in the intersection of sports business and athlete activism. And noticing that in this year that the players of the WNBA were more politically active than they've ever been. They saw record viewership, merchandise sales, sponsorship dollars. Their performance and results were off the charts. And it's something just kind of clicked for me, started thinking about that. And I really believe that women athletes just existing as women in sports, it's a form of activism. so I really became interested as like a student to learn more about the business of women's sports. And so I'm going for walks a lot. It's in the pandemic, and I'm almost done with the story here. We're almost done. But I was listening to podcasts, and I really wanted to listen to a podcast about the business of women's sports, and I couldn't find one. So I, like you, started a podcast and called it The Business Case for Women's Sports, and brought on leaders from the women's sports industry to talk about the business side of the industry, and learned so much. I still run the podcast. I've learned so much from all the leaders that have come on. And, you know, after a year of podcasting and putting out content on social media, making that business case for women's sports, kind of screaming into the internet that it's good business to invest in women's sports, I decided to take my skill set of sponsorship sales, marketing experience, and create a consultancy that will essentially put my money where my mouth is and try to bring in those dollars to women's sports organizations. And, you know, it's going really well. That's where Goals is today as a sponsorship consultancy. We now work with 8 clients. We're approaching, I want to say it's $500,000 of new dollars being brought into the women's sports space after just 5 months in operation, and hoping that's just the beginning, and we're going to continue from there. So that's the long, winding journey of Goals. And I've had a really, windy but wonderful career path. And it's just such an honor to be able to build on all of those experience and now be able to sit here and hopefully continue to create some change for women athletes and women in sports.
That's an amazing story, and congratulations also on the podcast. I saw that you made the top 5 in the Sports Business Awards.
Yes, it's I can't even believe it. It's a pretty surreal thing, but there's so many wonderful podcasts out there. But I think it just shows that people are really interested in content about women's sports. So it's such an honor to be able to be included in that list and keep doing this work.
Definitely. I applied actually as well on this podcast, and then I got an email like, here are the top 5s, and I was like, I didn't make it. And then when I saw the names, I was like, okay, that makes sense. That's fair. That because there were 5 great podcasts.
It's tremendous. And I have a lot more podcasts now on my list that I need to check out. It's a tremendous lineup. Yeah.
I know at least, because you said that there were not so many, I know that, I hope I pronounce her name correctly, Sue Anstis. She has one as well on women's sports. So hopefully maybe you are the trailblazer here that more and more women's sports podcasts will pop up.
There's so many amazing women's sports podcasts. What we talk specifically about, like the business and the industry and the sponsorship side, but 100%, I hope 20 podcasts pop up that talk about the business of women's sports or get into the business of women's soccer specifically. Like that only oneism is not something that I'm interested in, that I think anybody in this collective space is interested in. There are hundreds and hundreds of men's sports dedicated podcasts. I love to see women's sports get on that same level.
For sure. What's your Twitter account? Because you're very insightful Twitter, if you want to share it first with the listeners.
Yeah, so through the bit. So Goals has its channels. So it's at goals_sports_ on both Twitter and Instagram. And then me personally, I am at PGH Caroline, and that stands for Pittsburgh. So that's how much I love my city of Pittsburgh, at PGH Caroline. And if you go on either of those Twitter feeds, you'll find talkings about women's sports and building equity and equality in the space. On PGH Caroline, you might also see a couple pictures of my cat. So be ready for that as well.
Okay. So for women's sports and cats, you go to PGH Caroline. I think it was on this account that you tweeted out, girls who play sports become women who lead, which I found very interesting. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely. So that was a quote I heard. It was said by Playa Society, which is a tremendous women's sports retailer. And I read that, I think in one of their advertisements a year ago. It was around the time when the idea for goals was percolating and I was doing the podcast and I'm thinking about the business. And I read that and something just like clicked in my head about just how important it is for women and girls to be able to play sport, watch sport, see sport, lead in sport, work in sport. And that quote, though, doesn't just exist as like something that was said. There's data to back it up. Girls who play sports do become women who lead. And I believe it was Ernst & Young did a research study on C-suite executives, I believe in the United States. And they took a pulse on how many of female C-suite executives played sports growing up. And 94% of them did. So the data absolutely proves that girls that play sports become women who lead. So talking about this idea of sport as a vehicle for social change, having more girls play sports is going to lead to women leading across all types of industries, organizations. It's a key thing, in my opinion, to creating a more equitable world. So I think that my tweet said it's something I think about every day. It is absolutely something that I think about every single day.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I have always thought that sports in general is just a great school for leadership, for teamwork, for overcoming adversity. I mean, so many great things. So that now that you say that, also the statistics backs it up that women who play sports become great leaders. That's just another plus.
Absolutely. Sports teaches you every discipline, heartbreak, hard work, how to win, how to lose, how to work with the team. The list just goes on and on and on and on and on. So yeah, I could not agree with you more.
What would be your best advice for people, and maybe if we focus on women in this podcast, with aspirations to work in sports? What would be your best advice?
The biggest thing I will say is that women absolutely belong in sports. And I tweet this all the time. I talk about this is a space that has been historically built by men for men and has been a space that has not been particularly welcoming to anybody who does not identify as man. So please just know that you absolutely belong in these spaces and deserve the opportunities to work, play, lead, et cetera, coach. This space is just as much for you as it is for anybody else. So I think that's key. I know with the sales piece and the imposter syndrome, I struggled with that. But know that you are worthy and you belong there. That's a really big one.
For sure. Approaching the end here, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you feel is important to mention?
Great question. No, I think that's it. You've asked some really wonderful questions. I'll just close by saying thank you for all you're doing to have conversations like this and provide a platform for these discussions to be had. It's really important. And again, it's such an honor to be here and to have goals featured on your wonderful podcast.
I appreciate that. And thank you so much for taking the time. So then the last question that I ask everyone is, if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, who do you think that I should talk to?
What a great question. Oh my goodness. You know what? I have to recommend the first guest that ever came on my podcast. So the person's name is Eb Jones, and Eb is the woman responsible for the creation and the success of the WNBA's Orange Hoodie. So from the first episode on our podcast, she came on and told the whole story. She's the person that got the Orange Hoodie into Kobe Bryant's hands in the waiting room of the WNBA offices. She just is the mastermind that made it all happen. Her story's incredible, and she started a movement with what she did with the Orange Hoodie. So Eb Jones is incredible, such a legend. That's who I definitely would recommend.
I will try to make that happen. Caroline, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.